Mr. President, I've come to the floor today to discuss the need to strengthen the transportation system of our country, our roads, our highways, our bridges, our transit systems. A long time ago, a question was asked, and what is the role of government? And if you ask probably 100 people, they'd probably get maybe not 100 different answers, you get a lot of different answers. Abraham Lincoln was once asked, what is the role of government? And this is what he said. The role of government is to do for the people what they cannot do for themselves. Let me say that again. The role of government is to do for the people what they cannot do for themselves. When sometimes I go to schools and young students ask me, like, well, what do you do? Kids in elementary schools, 3rd, 4th, 5th graders, they say, what do you do? And I tell them I'm a United States Senator, and they say, what do you do? And I tell them I help make the rules for our country. We call them laws. I do that with 99 other senators, 435 representatives, the president and the vice president. And they say, well, what else do you do? And I tell them I help people. I help people. And the best way you can help somebody is to make sure they have a job. To make sure they have a job. I had the privilege of being governor of Delaware for 8 years. I'm told that in those 8 years, more jobs were created in Delaware than any 8 years in Delaware history. I did not create one of them. We've seen in the last 6+ years in this country, I think some 12 million jobs created. I didn't create one of them. My colleagues did not create those jobs. The President, the Vice President did not create those jobs. What we are responsible for doing here is to create a nurturing environment for job creation. Access to capital, to money, for businesses that need to raise money. A world-class workforce. Public safety. A clean environment. Public health. A tax code that's fair and reasonable. Regulations that embody common sense and reflect common sense. One of the other responsibilities of government is I actually have, believe it or not, Mr. President, we have in each of our desks here on the floor a book. And it's called a Senate Manual. We don't look at it that often. But if you go to one of the sections about 2/3 of the way through the book, you find the Constitution. And the Constitution lays out who was responsible for what, generally, in our country, for different responsibilities that do fall on government. There's a section in the Constitution, I'm not going to read it, but Senator Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma is oftentimes referred to it, where we talk about the obligation and responsibility of the federal government to post roads. And for years that's been read and interpreted to mean to build some roads. And to build some roads, some highways, some bridges, and as time goes by and we have more and more people, to build transit systems as well. And as it turns out, as we go along in time, after being a country for, almost 225 years or so, one of the most important things that we do in creating a nurturing environment for job creation, job preservation, is to help make sure that our country has a transportation system, roads, highways, bridges, transit systems, that are worthy of this great nation that we are. As a former governor, I like to say as a recovering governor, but as a former governor, I have seen firsthand the impacts that roads, highways, bridges, and transit systems have on the economic growth success in my state, in the region in which we live, and across this country. It's how we move people. It's how we move goods. And it's the key to an efficient and growing economy. For more than a decade, however, we have faced funding shortfalls for the Federal Highway Trust Fund. This stop and go funding, Mr. President, this lack of certainty has undermined the potential for economic growth in America for years. And that has to stop. In fact, since 2008, we've had to transfer nearly $65 billion out of the general fund, nearly $65 billion out of the general fund, which is far from running a surplus, to patch holes in the transportation, in the highway trust fund. I like to use, Mr. President, the example of the glasses And we have glasses here that the pages are nice enough to fill with water and to bring for us from time to time. And I'd like for this glass here to be the Federal Highway Trust Fund. It's empty. There's another glass here. This is the General Fund of the United States. It's empty. And we have another glass over here that's full. And it's full. And when the General Fund is empty and the Transportation Fund, the Highway Fund is empty, what we do is we go to this glass over here and say, how about some water, or how about some money? And we borrow money all over the world, all over the world. And one of the places we borrow a lot of it is China. And when the Chinese lend us money, they don't want to be bothered when we feel that they may have been manipulating their currency. And they'll say to us, well, we thought you wanted to borrow our money, so leave us alone on currency manipulation. Or they may say, leave us alone when it comes to taking unfair advantages in terms of trade. Or when the Chinese are pushing around the Vietnamese and the Philippines in the South China Sea, where I used to fly as a naval flight officer, when we say, you can't do that. And the Chinese might just respond, well, we thought you wanted to borrow our money. We find ourselves in a very difficult position to be obligated to a lender who is doing things that we think are inappropriate or just wrong. And unfortunately, with this example like the one I've just given you, this actually does happen. Mr. President, we haven't had a transportation bill that lasts for more than 2 years for, I think, now 7 years. It used to be commonplace. Every 6 years, we would pass and fund a transportation bill for our country. We called it a highway bill, but it was for roads, highways, bridges, and for transit systems. Every 6 years, almost like clockwork. The money provided by the federal government provides roughly 1/2 of all the money that's spent in state highway budgets, state transportation budgets. Half that money is federal money, appropriated by the Congress, approved by the President. And while we haven't passed a transportation bill lasting for more than 2 years, since 2008, we have passed some short-term funding provisions and authorization provisions for transportation. The last is as little as a few days. A few days. Now, this undercuts governors, it undercuts mayors around the country. It prevents them from making long-term investments in critical transportation projects. Earlier this year, and let me give a good example. State Route 1 in Delaware runs from I-95 in the north, down the right, north-south in our state, right past Dover, our state capital, past the Dover Air Force Base, heads on down to where the southern part of our state, where we raise more chickens and soybean in Sussex County, Delaware, than any county in America. It's this county that has, I think, more five-star beaches than any county in America. And when I was privileged to be governor of Delaware, we actually built and expanded and modernized State Route 1. And we replaced about 40 traffic lights with a 4-, 5-lane, 6-lane limited access highway that cuts not in half, but greatly eliminates it. And eliminates bottlenecks and expedites the flow of traffic in my state. It took over a decade. It took over a decade, maybe a dozen years, from start to finish. And why did it take that long? It's because these projects need some things. They need one, you have to take some money, some time rather, to plan the project. You have to take some time to fund the project. You have to take time to contract the project through competitive bids. You got to get the permits for the project. Sometimes there's litigation to work through. And it's just part of what has to be done to build a major road, highway, bridge in a state. My friends, it doesn't take just a few weeks to do this. It doesn't take just a few months to do this. It can take years. In the case of State Route 1 in a little state, it took years, roughly a dozen of them. And without the certainty that future federal funding will be there for a project, it's almost impossible to do it well. And frankly, without that kind of certainty, it's really expensive to do these projects. Stop and go. Stop and go means stop and pay a lot more money for the projects that we're trying to build. Yet even though we know that our states, our counties, our cities, and our businesses are counting on us here in this body to do our jobs, we let them down time and time again. And what's worse is that Congress has known about this problem for just about a decade, for almost a decade. It was in 2005 that Congress included provisions in transportation legislation to create not one, but 2 blue ribbon commissions. And for what purpose? Well, it helped us figure out how to pay for roads, highways, bridges, and transit systems. We said, we're not smart enough to figure this out. Why don't we put together some commissions and let the experts come in and they can help us out. And frankly, we just never received the reports, we received the recommendations, we just never acted on them. 2008, these 2 commissions delivered reports summarizing the advice of countless experts and giving us a roadmap to fixing problems for good. Among all their recommendations, one idea was stressed above all the rest, and that's gradually raise transportation user fees and then index them to inflation going forward. And still, despite understanding the problem and the smartest solutions for nearly a decade, we've only shirked our responsibility to agree on a solution again and again. Rather than take advantage of those blue ribbon ideas, we've continued to kick the can down the road, continued to avoid doing what voters sent here to do, and that's make decisions, tough decisions, in the best interest of our country. So I stand here today to say it's high time we finally take care of business, do the job the American people sent us here to do. My concern about this issue should come as no surprise to any of my colleagues. For years, I've been outspoken about my desire to fully fund a multi-year transportation bill. Government does have a clear role in ensuring that our country has modern, high-quality roads, highways, bridges, and transit systems. And that's why the framers of our Constitution had the good sense to as much as say so in that Constitution. Unfortunately, it seems that our courage and willingness to fulfill this responsibility continues to escape us. Instead, we avoid tough choices. We do things like we smooth pensions. We steal customs fees. Sometimes we'll steal customs fees that are not due for maybe 6, 7, 8 years in the future, and we steal money, that future money, and use it to pay for a couple of months' worth of roads, highways, and bridge construction today. We borrow mine safety funds. We apply other Band-Aids as well. The standard justification for each of these short-term patches has been that we need just a little more time to work out the details of a long-term plan. Just give us a little more time, and we will work this out. But as usual, during the 10 months we gave ourselves when we passed the last short-term extension, which was last, as I recall, early August. Last early August. The 12th time we've done this in 6 years, but in case anyone's lost count, we've come no closer to a solution. The Washington Post last summer may have put it best. And this is what they said: Congress doesn't need more time. Congress needs more spine. Albert Einstein once said the definition of insanity is doing something over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, today I'm asking my colleagues, our colleagues, to join me and others to help stop this insanity. As we work together, I know we can find a way to invest in a 21st century transportation system that our states, our cities, our businesses deserve and need in order to compete in a global marketplace. In an effort to do just that, Senator Boxer and I have introduced a measure that would at least get us started, taking a constructive step that would align the expiration of transportation programs with the funding available in the Highway Trust Fund. What we have right now, Mr. President, is at the end of this month, the authorization for spending federal money for these roads, highway, bridge, transit projects around the country, the authorization to spend that money expires, effectively stopping the use of federal money for these purposes, the end of this month. We can't let that happen. So the authorization ends at we'll say right here, at the end of May, in about 10 days. Meanwhile, the funds, the actual funds in the Transportation Trust Fund, the Highway Trust Fund, is good until the end of July. So the legislation that Senator Boxer has joined me in offering is, at least it says, if we can do nothing else, let's align the end of the authorization now May 31st, to the end of the funding, so that we can at least continue the work that's being done in states across the country in the meantime. If we work together, I know we can find a way forward. But anyway, we've introduced this legislation, and this adjustment will keep the Congress from putting this issue, we hope, on the back burner yet again. We hope this will increase the likelihood that we can finally sit down and agree to a long-term solution, not this fall, not next year, but this summer. And I know there are some who say, well, let's just push this off until December. We've done that before, we can do that again. I just say to my friends, we have a way of, we get into the elections. We get into the election cycle for presidents later this year. And maybe there's some who feel that that's going to be helpful to us in finding a way to come together and fund transportation projects. I would beg to differ. And I think if we don't get it done sooner rather than later, if we don't make these tough decisions now, we're not going to make them when the caucuses are gathering in Iowa and the primary voters are starting to get riled up in New Hampshire and South Carolina. That's not an environment that's going to lead itself to helping us do our jobs. There's a friend of mine who likes to talk about stopgap funding and the need to make a long-term commitment to America's growth and success. And he says it's something like what we do now is something like taking a road trip, maybe a summer road trip across the country this fall with our families, and stop to fill up our cars, our trucks, our minivans with gas 1 gallon at a time. Instead of filling up, we stop at a gas station, we get a gallon. And then we go down the road, and a little while later, we stop at another gas station, and we buy another gallon. It's wasteful, wastes time, it wastes money. It's no way to take a trip across country with your family, and I can assure you it's no way to build a transportation system for a world-class power, America. Well, in any event, I said earlier I took three ideas away from the elections last year. One, Americans want us to work together. Number two, they want us to get things done. And number three, they want us to do everything we can to enhance, to strengthen our economic recovery. Finally, finding agreement on a way to pass a fully funded 6-year transportation bill would help us do all three. We would demonstrate that we can work together. We would demonstrate that we can get stuff done in states and cities and counties across America. And number three, we really would strengthen our economic recovery. We wouldn't just put 600 or 700,000 people to work across America building roads, highways, bridges, and transit systems. We do a lot more than that. In fact, and that's important. Those folks, those jobs need to be filled, and a lot of people need to be able to do that kind of work, and they'd love to. But as it turns out, the McKinsey Global Institute recently reported that making a major effort to repair and improve our roads, our highways, our bridges, and transit systems could add about 1.5% to annual GDP growth and create at least 1.8 million jobs. Let me say that again. A major effort to repair and improve our roads, highways, bridges, and transit systems could add about 1.5% to annual GDP growth. Keep in mind, GDP growth, I think, in the last quarter was only about 1%. But this kind of investment could increase, add another 1.5% to annual GDP growth, and create almost 2 million jobs. By failing to pass a long-term transportation bill, we are sacrificing this potential growth and job creation. It's a little bit like leaving money on a table. In this case, a lot of it on a table. The federal government shares responsibilities with state governments to make investments in our aging infrastructure. And I said earlier, the federal government, when states spend money on roads, highway, bridge projects, whether it's New Hampshire or Delaware, half of that money, roughly half of that money is coming from the federal government. Our states are counting us to be partners in funding our transportation system that the families and businesses we represent count on every day. When our federal policy fails to plan for the future, we leave these people in the lurch. The Highway Trust Fund has several dedicated revenue streams in the form of various user fees, as we know. These fees haven't been adjusted for over 2 decades. And during that time, the purchasing power of our transportation has nearly been cut in half. Increases in the price of concrete, asphalt, steel, and labor. The 18.3-cent federal gas tax we set up in 1993 is now worth less than a dime. 24-cent diesel tax is worth less than 15 cents. Congressional Budget Office put together a chart here on my left that shows the growing difference between the Highway Trust Fund, the monies that we put out for transportation projects, and the money that we take in from user fees. Actually, we were doing reasonably good from 1998 to 2014. Every 6 years, you see it go up, and it drops down, and it goes up, and it drops down. That's that 6-year transportation authorization bills that are adopted in the funding that flows. Look what happened starting this year. And I might add, in the last several years here, a lot of this money was just transfers out of the general fund. It wasn't monies that were actually raised. And then we borrowed most of that money from around the world. But we get to here to 2015, and look what happens. The end of the year, every year up through 2025, this is the money down here. This is the shortfall. This is the shortfall. And I think it adds up, if you look, to about $140 billion by 2025. You don't have to be an accountant, Mr. President. You got a problem when you're spending like this outpaces what you collect more and more each year. I'm almost done. We need to find a long-term solution that we can agree on to fix this problem, and we need to do it this summer. We don't need to do it this fall. We don't need to do it next winter. We need to do it this summer. Again, I talked about kicking a can into a presidential year. If we don't do it this summer, my fear is we won't do it at all, at least not for a long-term bill. Many of my colleagues have said that we must wait until we can enact comprehensive tax reform that creates revenues to solve this problem. And as a strong supporter of tax reform, Mr. President, I hope we can find a way to reform our tax code, find a way to generate some revenues that can be used to invest in our roads, highways, bridges, and transit systems. I understand this idea has support not just from President Obama, but also from House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Paul Ryan, and that's encouraging. One thing I know for sure is that that idea is a lot better than kicking the can down the road. But we've been talking about doing tax reform for years, let's be honest. And it's one of the most complicated tasks that Congress is facing. We can't just wait around letting our highways and our transit systems that people count on to deteriorate while we negotiate this incredibly tough decision surrounding tax reform efforts. And furthermore, tax reform only offers one-time revenues that won't fix the long-term problem with the Highway Trust Fund. I believe we have to have a viable backup plan in case a bipartisan deal on tax reform continues to elude the Congress. And that's why, Mr. President, I've talked literally to a dozen members of the House and the Senate from both parties, asked them to share with me their most thoughtful ideas into what I hope could become an all-the-above transportation funding proposal that we expect to unveil the beginning of next month. And I just urge any of my colleagues with serious thoughts on how to shore up the Highway Trust Fund to bring us their ideas and join this effort. Because I hope to present such a plan, as I said earlier, very soon, and to make sure that we don't once again kick this can yet again down the road. There's time to act. It's not next year. It's not around Christmas time. It's this summer. Gas prices this Memorial Day weekend will be lower than any Memorial Day in recent memories, and likely to stay there for at least a while longer. Read recently that the prediction is that they're actually going to start dropping again as we get into the summer. There's an amazing coalition, I might add, of stakeholders from all parts of the community, frankly, all parts of our country, geographically and from throughout the business sector and all, government as well. And they support a long-term transportation bill. There are businesses, there are labor unions, there are construction companies, there are transits, there are retail businesses, there are manufacturing businesses, and a lot of American families. And from them, the message to us is the same. It's time to do the right thing. It's time for us to do our jobs. It's time for us to give America the roads, the highways, the bridges, the transit systems that we can be proud of, and will help our nation to continue to grow and to be great. Mr. President, thank you so much. I yield the floor.